Hello, everyone. Yes, we are in another lockdown. And what will that all mean? How will you cope this time? I'm Tracy Koga, and I might be smiling a little bit because I want to welcome you to our brand new show, Hue Home. And this is going to be a safe and inclusive place for people to share their personal stories and also engage into some thought-provoking conversations. So tonight we are going to hopefully hit it out of the park with a very powerful chat with some incredible guests. We're going to tackle racism in all its ugliest forms, and especially in the Asian communities. And of course, mental health. It has never been so important for all of us. And how are we going to support each other? Well, we'll soon find out. So let's open our great Zoom door to all of our special guests tonight. Hey, I'm giving a virtual wave because that's what I do. Wow, oh my goodness. Look at all these faces. I feel so alone here, but not alone. It's so great to see everyone. Now my screen is very big and I am going to do kind of like a roundtable introduction or a little, so just wave when I say your name and hopefully, and we will have more people joining in, but it's so great to see all of you. Now you will be muted right now, so you can unmute yourself so I can hear everybody and you can chat too as well. So right now I am going to welcome Tina Chen. I can see Tina right in my screen, so give a big wave. University professor, and you know what? We're going to have a big conversation on xenophobia because I know, Tina, you know a lot about that. And I see Uzoma Aswagara. She is our MLA for Union Station. Thank you so much tonight, Uzoma, for joining us. And Rana Bakari, a lawyer and, well, more than a lawyer, a great friend. Thank you. And Melinda, I see you now. Melinda Lee, thank you so much for all of your work, media and marketing expert and consultant. Thank you so much. And Robin Priest, cheers, cheers. Co-founder, Robin Priest, Live Your Truth, peer support worker, awesome, awesome. And Susie Erzavik Parker, give a big wave, social media expert. And you know what? She will summarize everything tonight so eloquently that will shut everybody up, guaranteed. Just kidding, Susie. Charlotte, I can see you. Thank you so much. Give a big wave. Again, co-founder and mental health advocate and family peer support worker. Dr. Art Mickey, thank you so much too. Give a big wave, Art. There you go, Asian Heritage Society. Clayton Sandy, thank you so much for joining us to Ethnocultural Council of Manitoba now. But definitely want to talk too more about reconciliation and things that are happening in your neighborhood. And I've got Jessica Triddle. Jessica, give a big wave. Again, heard so much about you. She is a peer support worker, peer-to-peer connections, doing some amazing work. Dr. Mooney Mysore, give a big wave. Mooney, so good to have you. She is a psychiatrist, and again, done so much work for the Asian Heritage Society. And who am I missing? Who am I missing here? Oh, Wanda. Wanda, give a big wave. Sorry. I'm meeting some of you for the first time, but thank you too. So Wanda is from the Aurora Family Therapy Center. She's the Director of Finance Administration, but knowing so much more what's going on with everything. So I'm gonna do a round table. We're putting racism on the table right now as our topic. And tonight, folks, it's really about sharing your point of view, also sharing your lived experience, and also how it has affected your community too as well, because thank you again so much. But you know what? This is my first experience too, having so many different communities involved. And sorry, Diane Rusin, I forgot, from the Boldness Project. Thank you so much for coming. And Diane has been on our chats too before, and it's been really, really amazing. So anyways, I'm going to go first with Tina then. With the whole, I hate to use the word the racism card, because that's not what it is. Because we're going to talk about and hear about systemic racism, and also racism due now to COVID-19. And I did say in my opening statement how it has affected the Asian community, especially. And this was, definitely part and parcel of this whole conversation. But more importantly, everyone, we want to learn. We want to learn and share from everybody. I think in this day and age now, we've heard too much, know too much, but we really haven't had a time to listen. So tonight, if anything, we all can listen and also share. So Tina, you're it. You're my
Well,
first square
thank
in my
you.
box.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for, bringing together this absolutely fantastic group of people. And, I think I'm mostly excited to hear from everybody else and that you've brought us together for a conversation. And I was thinking a lot about, what to talk about tonight. We all know that, particularly with COVID-19, the kind of explicit racism against the Chinese community in the early days was very marked. And it was marked across Canada and Winnipeg and Manitoba and other places. And what's we found that was really interesting is as projects, particularly those with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, start to create mechanisms for reporting racism, that in Manitoba, there weren't a lot of reports coming forward, that people weren't really sharing those opportunities. And I think, in many ways, it's a reminder of the way that racism often is born individually as something that, can't be shared, that people feel really uncomfortable with, just speaking out and saying that it's happened to them. And also how we often kind of question whether those microaggressions were really, targeted at us. Did we misread them? Do we want to kind of create a scene, or should we just kind of step back? And I think this is, for me, and I think it's something that I'm sure we'll all pick up. I think this is actually where the stress of the moment and the kind of isolation becomes greater. And so many fantastic organizations are trying to create that support and those, opportunities, but without physical interaction and kind of having spaces where you can gather and share the stories, I feel like the isolation, I'm kind of, in the individual level, makes racism feel so much more pronounced. But I thought that really what I want to share was I also have like good news stories, I think. So I wanted to share a bit of those as well, because one of the things with COVID-19 and thinking about racism, and particularly anti-Asian racism, is that, it coincided with the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement through this summer. And particularly many in the Asian community started to think a little bit more about, well, what's our role in, thinking through anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism and what's the relationship to the Asian community. And so I've been, also alongside these, part of an emerging organization that finally came up with a cool new name. So POW is our name, the Prairie Asian Organizers. And really it's a group that's been coming together to reflect on what Asian communities need to do to think about shared experiences of systemic, institutional, and personal racism for all BIPOC communities, but also to acknowledge the differences, and particularly to engage things like the model minority myth. So what does it mean when Asians often get put forward as a model minority? So this, and precisely these ways of learning to just be disciplined, quiet, and step forward and do your work. But how has that also kind of created the conditions for increased anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism? And this group is, I think for me, just being a phenomenally productive space of conversation, always online and physically distanced in these different ways, but because I think it challenges us to place in the broader context our experiences with racism, and also, that it's not always all the same. And so I think I'll just leave it there, because I really want to hear about everybody else's as well, but I wanted to kind of take this opportunity also to talk about these new conversations that have been generated, in the last few months as well.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, Tina. I'm going to go to Mooney now. Mooney.
Yes, I agree with everything said, and we have an explanation. We try to explain why Asians, talking particularly about Asians, behave in such a manner. Asian cultures operate on shame, honor, and so it's a collectivism, a collectivistic culture where people are shamed for not fulfilling group expectations. So if one person goes and embarrasses themselves, so to speak, by reporting an incident, or they're seen as weak for acknowledging and reporting an incident, they feel embarrassed, and they have to, the whole community accepts that that is a shameful thing to do. So we were also trying to understand through Asian Heritage Society how come on our website we posted this, report hate crime, and there was hardly anybody. I think ours
Mooney,
was one.
Mooney, sorry, I hate to interrupt you. We're just having some audio issues, so I'm wondering if your speaker should be turned up or if you could just speak closer. I
Okay,
know
I'll speak closer.
a
Is that
little bit,
better?
maybe just turn the volume up on your speaker too. Would that, no?
It
Okay.
says it's at 100%.
I don't,
Is this better?
yes, that's better.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a little new laptop I'm having trouble with. So please raise your hand if you can't hear me. So should I repeat the whole thing? I think our culture, the Asian culture, is such that we operate on shame and honor. So it's a collectivistic culture. So we represent the whole group. So if one person goes and says something or reaches out for help, and they feel that it reflects on the whole community. So they're afraid to this seeking help or complaining or pointing out racist incidents is not considered. Um, there's no empowerment for them to do it because they're feeling more ashamed. They they feel weak and ashamed that they have to go and report this, and it brings on the shame for the whole community. Can you hear me? Well,
It's a,
no.
we can't, pardon?
Can you hear me?
It cuts in and out, Mooney,
Oh,
and I'm,
you know what?
yeah.
I'll go get another laptop. So maybe I'll be back in 5 minutes with another
Okay,
laptop.
that would be wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you.
Very well.
Technology. Okay, so we will come back to Mooney because I know that she was, obviously bringing up some very, very important points. So I would like to go now to Uzoma. If you want to
Yeah.
share.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone's staying safe, doing well. Thanks for having me back. I see you, Susie. Shout out to you. So I guess what really comes to mind for me, especially I guess based on what Tina has already identified, the convergence of these pandemics that we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with the pandemic that is COVID-19, but we're also dealing with the pandemic that is systemic racism and discrimination and how that manifests itself. And the issues around that are being amplified and exposed in ways that are irrefutable during this pandemic. And so we're seeing the ways in which people who have massive platforms have been able to perpetuate anti-Asian discrimination and have been able to drive a narrative that is xenophobic, that is incredibly harmful. But we're seeing how the mechanisms in which they've been able to do that and the ways in which that is perpetuated through our collective societies. And that is, using any opportunity where there's mass fear, concern, disruption to be able to amplify things that are really problematic and harmful. And I think what's really interesting is that what I've seen anyway on a personal level and in communities, queer communities, Black communities, is this recognition of, okay, we know what it's like. We know what it's like to be treated this way in this manner when these situations arise, when there's crises, being blamed for these things, being targeted because it's a way to distract from certain individuals or bodies being accountable and responsible for their own decision making. And seeing a lot of Black people, queer people, really everybody rally around Asian communities and say, we know what's going on here. We see this and it's wrong. And we stand with you and we're going to push back against this. And then also, I've seen a lot of Asian people, Asian communities, stepping forward and saying, wow, like we see how this works and operates, and recognizing the ways in which those very same people who perpetuate those racist narratives have been doing that to so many communities for such a long time. Really being able to identify how anti-Black racism, how anti-Indigenous racism is perpetuated, and the situations which, racist people, to be blunt, will mobilize and utilize times of crisis or uncertainty or whatever it is to, further those erroneous narratives. And so I think that what we're seeing now is a really important and unique opportunity to have dialogue and constructive conversations and organizing around themes that have been around a very long time, but that I think people are really recognizing, doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve any of us. And the last point I want to make is that when we see jurisdictions that are being transparent about disaggregated race-based data during this pandemic, we see that COVID-19, it affects everybody, but it doesn't affect everybody equally, right? We're seeing the communities that are disproportionately disadvantaged in this pandemic and affected by this virus. And that reflects the inequities that already exist in our communities. And Manitoba is a jurisdiction that unfortunately has yet to present that data, but that's a really concrete example of how discrimination affects communities on a systemic level, and why it's so important for us to not only recognize it, but be strategic in how we address it.
No. Thank you, Uzoma. I'm going to go to Clayton. Clayton Sandy, your comments.
There, how's that?
Good, good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and pass my thanks on to Marty for reconnecting us again.
Yeah.
I guess the topic, I think I probably have faced racism my entire life. I find that in 1941, before I was born, my father signed up for World War II and lost his status at that time. So the kids that came after my dad got back, we were all non-status, and my dad wasn't even considered an Indian at that time, because his status was taken away for joining the Canadian services. So our family grew up around army bases. So all the way through, we were probably the only Indigenous or Native or Indian family that was in the army base. So it just seemed like it went all through my life, basically having to fight and having to try and survive in that system. I moved to Winnipeg in 1975 and started working with the government in 1977. And now that I'm retired, now when I look back, I feel like I spent 36 years in government doing Indian 101. I felt it seemed like all the departments I worked in, it just seemed like there were visible minorities in most of the departments I worked in. But I found that whenever I raised a topic of racism, nobody would say nothing or nobody would do anything. And I think basically people, whether they're East Indian or Asian, nobody just didn't want to rock the boat, and nobody wanted just to call it the way it was. So most of the people that I worked with, um, I never got that far talking about it and sharing my own experience with them, even though that we're experiencing it on a probably on a daily basis in the late 70s and 80s and into the 90s. I don't think it wasn't until probably in the early 90s when the Indigenous community started waking up and starting to probably organize, is when I felt that there was some kind of a paradigm shift going through the Helen Betty Osborne, going through the Meech Lake Accord, and going through all that history when I start actually feeling change. And it probably wasn't until 4 years ago. I'm the co-founder of Circles for Reconciliation, and on my journey, I've always extended my hand to anybody that wanted to learn or wanted to be my friend. But at that time, I had a chance to meet Art Mickey at that time, and we did the Circles for Reconciliation over at the Japanese Association, and we spent the afternoon doing 2 circles there, exchanging food and sharing our history. And that was actually my first time when I actually heard the history of Asian people in Canada. I knew about the internment camps, but I didn't know anything beyond that. But just to hear the history and just to hear the treatment, it felt so similar to the treatment that I grew up with, and the treatment and because I never had an opportunity to live on a reserve. I went back many times to both my parents' reserves, Sioux Valley and Pipestone, and I could feel the same thing there. But I found that after we did that Circles for Reconciliation with the Japanese Association, and then 2017, I was dancing powwow at Broken Head Powwow, and partner Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg had a tent set up there. I went over and I spoke to a guy named Hanny, and we had a good conversation. And Hanny and I became really good friends since then. So him and we've been doing quite a bit of stuff together. And the more time I spend with any different ethnic group, I realize the impact that what's happening is happening to all of us. And it's nice to see that different ethnic groups are starting to finally stand up and starting to call it the way it is. So it's nice to see the young people that are actually coming forward and not being afraid of the system. So I felt I grew up in a system where people were just afraid to challenge the system and basically to speak up in government departments. So everybody's kind of kept their head low. I worked in 7 different departments, and I think because I was a troublemaker and had a hard time shutting my mouth all the time, I got moved around quite a bit. But I wasn't afraid of that. But I found that the non-native people that I called my dear friends after retirement were non-native people that had they're able to open up their mind and basically accept people for who they were, and that made a big difference in my world. And just basically spending time trying to educate people, and of course having a family, and teaching my children and now my grandchildren that are right from wrong, and to be colorblind. So that's a big piece of that, and being part of that change has been really important to me. In the early 80s, I got my status back and got a status number and became an Indian once again. And I found that now that I'm connected to Sioux Valley, I'm able to get connected and spend time with the leadership there and share my experience and share my expertise with different bands now. So that's a big piece of that. And so I'm finding that now that I'm expanding I guess my roles with either Immigrant Partnership Winnipeg or different other associations. I'm finding that there's becoming some really good true partnerships and some really true friendships, and I think from the children that they have and I have and my grandchildren are finding that our children are starting to make a big difference and starting to feel proud of who they really are. I'll stop there.
Oh, Clayton, that's so beautiful. And maybe tonight this conversation will be the beginning of much more conversations, because it's all sharing stories. And just to add on, my grandfather fought in the First World War and got his medal stripped away from him because he was Japanese. So it's I hear your story. But anyways, I will go now.
I want to just add one more thing. My father, he'll be 101 next month. So he's still kicking, and yesterday he participated as best he could in Remembrance Day, and he never ever wanted his status back ever. So he's always lived off reserve.
Oh, beautiful. Wanda, give us your thoughts.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here and join this wonderful group. So I work at Aurora Family Therapy Center, and we have a very large newcomer program. So we work with a lot of the newly arrived refugee communities. We also have a smaller Chinese community that we do work with. So we work not because we are a therapy organization, but when we work with newcomers, we work in groups. And so they're therapeutic groups. So they're, they're, because there's all that stigma. If you have to go and see a therapist, there's something wrong with you. And, there's that whole stigma attached to that. So the way we work is that we do have our groups. We have therapists that come into the groups to kind of do some of the mental health and well-being sessions with the newcomers, or even talk about just different issues. I know we have one of our Filipino groups that, we usually have a prescribed program for most of our groups. And this one particular time, there was one family that had just moved in, and I'm not sure which area of the city that they had moved into, but found that they were, and this was just quite at the beginning of the COVID situation. So they were just harassed by some of the neighbors, and because they look Chinese, they're Asian, but they're not Chinese, and so just the negative comments that were coming back and forth, and they didn't really understand because they didn't have all the vocabulary to be able to understand what the neighbors were saying. So they were just terrified. They wouldn't even allow their children to go out in the backyard to play because when the neighbors were out there, then they were yelling and screaming profanity and everything else and spitting on them and everything. So it was really hard. So, we had our groups and were able to share, their story and trying to figure out a way how they could cope. And then it was interesting just to hear that just with that one family sort of opening up, then there was other stories that kept coming up and about the racism. So this really ended up being kind of a healing group because they knew that there was supports from others. And, when Clayton sort of talks about IPW, Aurora was one of the founding members for IPW. And, we have quite a few of the community groups who go and they support other groups. So Noor, who passed away this summer, there was some large families in the inner city, and there was some conflict between some of the Indigenous groups. And so he said, well, they needed really to do something to build rapport, right? So Canada Day, him and his community decided to have a block party barbecue, and I think they served over 500 or 600 people, and just been able to share stories of how they were treated, both from Noor's side, the community side, and the Indigenous people. They ended up doing this huge dancing. There was, the Indigenous drummers there, then the Syrians sort of, also start teaching their dance. So it was just a really different way of being able to connect on a human level, right? And be able to see that there are a lot of differences. And there are a lot of issues between communities, but if you get together and be open, as Clayton was saying, being open-minded, then you can sort of break down some of those barriers and become friends with others. So that's one story, a couple of stories that I wanted to share about the racism.
Oh, wow. Well, that's so true. It's just sitting and listening. So, Dr. Mooney, hopefully we have you back. You might be muted right now. Just maybe unmute yourself.
Okay, testing. Can you hear me better?
Perfect. Yes.
Oh, well, thank you. I don't know how much of it, the part you missed and got glimpses of, but it's just that certain cultures are not very open to sharing because of the fear of stigma and shame and embarrassment. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was, are we hardwired? Is our brains hardwired to be racist? And if you look at evolutionary biology, there was a time when we had to survive in small groups, and those groups protected each other. If you looked like the other person, then they were your kin. And so you needed the primitive brain, the amygdala, to survive. And as we all evolved, our brains have grown too, and different parts of the brain now perform different functions. So to live in that society, you needed the primitive brain. To live in our society, which is now multicultural, it's complex, We are linked by neighborhoods, by countries. We're global. And in order to survive in this 21st century, we need a different brain. So how do you undo, or how do you develop that new part of brain, your cortex, to appreciate people, to appreciate diversity? Because if you want to live in this interdependent global world, you need that kind of brain. So that's what we need to focus on how to educate people about the differences between the primitive brain and the cognitive, cognitively developed, educated brain. We can overcome racism by doing this. If you just look at the global, during this pandemic, what happened to the global supply, that our chain is global, the supply chain. So you make a car in Germany, but you get parts from all over the world. And if you don't get those parts, the car's not made. So that's how dependent we are on each other, regardless of race or, your looks. And that brings us to systemic racism. And that's, again, a construct created by society. We're all one race, the human race. But then based on certain physical characteristics, we are divided up, hierarchy, based on color and shape of your eyes. You're in some kind of a ladder, who's on top, who's at the bottom. So that's something that we have done as a society, which we can also undo. I think I'll stop there.
Well, we're certainly going to have questions from everybody. I'm going to go to Dr. Art Mickey. Art, your take. You're on.
Thank you, Tracy. Glad to be here. First of all, I just want to indicate to you that I'm with the Asian Heritage Society of Manitoba. And I guess one of the things that we recognize with the COVID and the racism directed towards Asians, that our organization decided to try to collect some data. And so on our website, we had a little reporting form. But interesting enough, we had very few responses. And I think it reflects again to what Muni was mentioning about our communities. And to give you a good example, there's a senior in my community who was telling me that one day he was in a supermarket and some woman came up to him and started yelling at him, telling him to get away from her and so on. And he was so embarrassed, he didn't know what to do. So I said to him, well, did you report it? He said, oh, no, I would never do that. Because there's a reluctance to admit that something like this happened. And I go back to my own community during the internment. And if you talk to a lot of people who were interned, they really never talked about the experiences because of the racism. And it was something that they didn't want to even share with their parents. And I'm thinking, well, how would these same people, they wouldn't have difficulty sharing it with someone completely different, such as a manager of a store or so on. They would rather forget and let it go. And that's, I think, that one of the difficulties within our own communities. Even though there are reports, I'm sure there are many incidents that have not been reported as a result of the cultural characteristics. And so that's one of the issues. But it was interesting because with all of the COVID and all of the incidents that arose with the Black Lives Matter, I also belong to the Canadian Race Relations Foundation in Toronto. For years and years, we've always had a fundraising component where the communities or people could donate to help the cause of the work of the foundation. And just after Black Lives Mattered, all of a sudden we had this influx of money coming in, well over $300,000 from Canadians. And I think it reflected to us that there's such a concern by the general population about what's happening, that they were responding in their own way to show support, that there should be something done about that. And so that was an interesting phenomenon because up to this point in time, I don't think we got $5,000 in donations, and all of a sudden there's this windfall. But I think it was just that general outpouring of feeling towards what was happening to our different communities. And I think that that's a reflection that through COVID, we've begun to learn, even though there is this issue of racism that's surfaced to a greater degree, I think there are a lot of Canadians who are really concerned about what's happening. So that's a reflection. The other part is that as Asian communities, we're not that really that open to working with other groups. In fact, I know that within our own community, there's a lot of people who are quite racist towards us. We know that. But one of the things that we try to do is through our Japanese community is to try to begin to link up. And I remember when the city of Winnipeg had the reconciliation project, and we as an organization decided to join up and support it. And what surprised me was that we were the only, of all the organizations that took part and who were the first joiners, we were the only ethnic community that was part of that. And I was thinking, you know, we should be all supporting each other, but that sort of said to us that, you know, I think there's a lot to be done yet in terms of our own communities. And as a result of it, Sandy Clayton already referred to the circle we had with our community. And you know, and people still talk about it, and they say, you know, we should do it again. And I think we need to do it again, Clayton, because I think it's important. These are the things that really make an impact, I think, on people when you begin to sit down and talk to each other and share those stories, because there is a lot of commonalities. So that's my take on this, Tracy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Art. Well, this is our virtual version of, of that. Hopefully someday very soon we can all be in the same room. I'm going to go to my good friend Rana Bakari. Hey, girl. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot now.
No, that's fine. That was just, it was so interesting to hear everyone's take on it. So, I mean, you know, Art and Clayton and Wanda and Minnie, you guys did a great job. And who else? I'm missing somebody, but can't see the screen. But, you know, like I think that there's also, I think Art kind of touched upon it, like from our community, you know, what I saw during the pandemic was very, maybe not to the extent, but it was very similar to after 9/11, the increase in Islamophobia, right? Like you just started othering this one group of people, and no matter what they did, no matter what they said, they were the others, and they were to be, you know, shunned and treated poorly and looked upon as if they were, you know, something, you know, not to be befriended. And the unfortunate part about this whole thing is that definitely there's a lack of education on all fronts. I truthfully don't believe that our educational system does enough to actually to teach young humans what it actually means to not just be friends with somebody who is different than you, but to also take that little extra part where you start to understand their differences. Because I know that Clay kind of talked about it, you know, some of these circles, and, you know, they're beautiful opportunities to have people come together and find out what that common thread in humanity actually is, right? And when you know what the commonality is, you're going to be maybe less likely to hate and, you know, approach people with that negative, those negative feelings. But like, I could only speak from our community level or from my community level. I mean, we as a family, as a group, are a minority within our own community. You know, we're Shia within a larger Muslim community, so we also deal with it within our own community, where there's, you know, racial issues within our own. So, you know, for people like me, you know, we get it at all fronts, right? You get it within the community, you get it outside the community, you get it everywhere else. But I think that the one really important part that I would really hit on is the educational part of it. But, you know, like while everyone was talking, I was just thinking about a story. I think I was telling somebody, might have been on the Hue crew a while back. You know, when we were kids, we're first generation, you know, we grew up in Enola, basically the only brown family in Enola, Manitoba, in the 70s. And I remember going to weddings or going to places having henna on our hands as a form of beauty and celebration. And I remember almost being made fun of about that. People being like, ew, what's on your hand? And just kind of really making you feel disgusted by your own self because you had it on. And then I remember watching later on in life as I grew up, having this different group have to legitimize something that was mine, that was ours. And then suddenly it was okay. Right. And that part to this day is probably one of the biggest parts. One of, not the only, but one of the biggest parts that causes me a lot of, I'm not going to say anger, but definitely makes me want to really wonder why someone else has to be the one legitimizing something that belongs to us. So it really depends on, cultures, right? It's like for us, we're a very vibrant culture, when it comes to clothes and jewelry and decorating ourselves and whatnot. And it was always made to be, oh, you're a packy and you're this and that. And, to be honest with you, like we went through our whole lives hearing that. And the other part of it is, and it hurts, right? Like it doesn't make you feel good. For young kids, it's really etched in your mind. It took me a lot of life. And really, even at 43, I'm still cracking through it, right? Because it's embedded in your head. But I think that the most telling part of what and who we are as a society is when I was in politics. If you can imagine that, one of the last days before an election, there was a letter that went out to an entire community basically calling me a terrorist, that CSIS was after me. And, the only reason I wanted to be anything political was because I wanted to implement Sharia law, and there's things like that happen. And this was only just 5 years ago. And I think that the really sad part of it is that was public knowledge. It was really everywhere, but you never saw any media about that to just say, hey, maybe this is not something that you want to be doing, or this is wrong. So for me, I still, as a 43-year-old young, very accomplished, I would say, woman, I carry a lot of narratives. Like I carry a lot of different narratives in my head, and and at the end of the day, racism hurts. Like I try to do my best to be open and accepting to everyone and wanting, to engage and to learn about people's differences and culture. But I think that there needs to be it needs to be mutual, right? You need to have all parties kind of involved, willing to have that openness, and ability and willingness to really educate and understand, and not just sit there, as some token, oh, well, you look a certain way, so I'm going to sit here and have this conversation, take a picture with you, post it on Facebook, and pretend I'm all about this. That's not what we're looking for. I think people need to be really getting to the roots of what those differences are, deep down, understand what the similarities are, accept those differences, and move on in a positive way. But you can't do that without the education. One last thing specifically for our community, I think when you spoke about it, Archie spoke about it too. A lot of our communities, Asian communities, Eastern communities, we don't talk about stuff openly. We're very communal. When somebody says one thing, it affects everybody else. So a lot of us haven't learned to be able to openly speak about that, and I'm a prime example of that. I'm a first generation person. How many people have actually ever heard me really talk about all the racism that went on when I was in public, whether it was letters, whether it was comments, whether it was right to my face, every single day for 5 years, right? It was a big part of why I wasn't there anymore. But again, based on the lens I view the world through because of my own community, I didn't feel comfortable talking about it. And I'm still trying to just, and again, I say this because I'm growing and I'm learning as I go along too. And I'm just starting to do that. And sometimes you need help. Sometimes it's okay to ask for help when you're dealing with those things, and how to manage them and not take them personally and not make them hurt you deep inside, and learn to do it. But I really hope that there's another generation that comes along and they learn those skills as well, because I wish I would have had the skill set, right, to be able to deal with it at that time and not be carrying it today and starting to figure it out. But that's all.
Well, you know what, girl? Now's the time to start. We have some great mental health peer support workers here that I'm just waiting to give their opinion. But I'm going to go to Diane Rusin now. Diane, I'm going to say maybe you can give us a grassroots, what's happening like now with all of this in your community, and of course with your involvement with the Boldness Project.
Well, yeah, so there's lots has been said so far, and I'm nodding my head here through all of the comments that have been made so far. You know, when we're talking about systemic, or when we're talking about racism in general, I mean, there's lots to be said about that, and certainly, as other panelists have pointed out, that a lot of that gets exacerbated under, you know, the conditions that we're in right now with this pandemic. But I think what has been helpful for me to understand about racism, I mean, other than experiencing it my whole entire life being an Indigenous female, is really understanding the difference between individual acts of racism and systemic racism. And both are awful. And, you know, as Rana was just saying, like, you know, when you experience those individual acts of racism, you know, it scars you and you carry that narrative. And for me, all through growing up, it was, I knew that in my own household that I was a superstar. Like I was taught that, made to feel that way. Like my family thought, you know, I was a rising star and I'm going to be someone important. I'm going to do amazing things. The minute I stepped outside my door, I knew that there was a different narrative. I knew that society thought that I was a second-class citizen and I was treated like that the minute I walked outside my door. So certainly those individual acts of racism, you know, and now I'm a mom and I have kids and I'm just like mama bear. I don't want anybody messing with my kids. But what scares me the most, but my kids, you know, they're tough too, hey? Like I've raised them like that. And I don't want them to experience those individual acts of racism, but when they do, I know that they'll, you know, be brave and strong and have courage when they deal with it. What really scares me is the systemic racism. And so you just look at the stats in Manitoba, and like when we have 11,000 children in the care of CFS, 95% of them are Indigenous. That is systemic racism. That is not because Indigenous people don't know how to parent our children. There is something systemically happening that is making that happen. Those numbers carry for every single system. So conservatively speaking, 75% of those incarcerated are Indigenous, right? Who's, you know, the mental health, the health, who's not getting educated, who's unemployed, you know, who's not running businesses, all those numbers carry, and that is systemic racism. And that's the thing that I feel, oh my gosh, how are my kids going to navigate that? So that really worries me. And knowing, you know, those different kinds of racism. But I think, you know, so how do we, like, you know, what are pathways out of that? And I do think about the idea of, you know, what's been said already here, that we need to build these relationships and we need to have, like, you know, really strong sets of trust. I've always been taught by knowledge keepers that, you know, the best healing happens in the best relationships, right? In the strongest relationships. So I do fundamentally center that in my work and centering relationship building, because I think that that's when those relationships are super strong. That's when we can have the most difficult conversations, because we have to have difficult conversations. We have to. Again, being a brown girl, I've been subjected to unsafe conversations my whole life. I'm in them every day. And so when people keep saying they want to have safe conversations, I mean, I'm not out to have unsafe conversations, but I'm in unsafe conversations every single day. And people want to have a safe conversation about racism. And so I go, well, I think we need brave conversations, you know, and hopefully they can be safe. But if they need to be difficult, hopefully we have a really good relationship that we can have the difficult relationships. And again, I think this has been said by a few different panelists. I do feel like as society, or as a mainstream society, we do well at what unifies us and what we have in common. And so we use that to bring us together. What we don't do so well is to embrace our difference and our diversity. And so, you know, Randy, you're saying if people could just accept it and move on. I'm like, dude, we got to embrace it and hold it up. And because I think that our diversity, it expands the pie, it takes us further. And so I don't, like, if you don't see my color, you don't see me, right? If you don't see that I'm a brown girl, like fiercely, and that I am, you know, exuding my culture, like, you don't see me, and my culture is not the same as yours, right? And so, but when we both are able to draw upon the fullness of each of our cultures, like I think we all just benefit in so many different ways when we do that. So again, I agree with lots of what's been said before, but we just need to get better, I think, at embracing the diversity and using it or drawing upon that to push us forward and to push us more further. When it comes to the COVID piece, again, like all of us have been affected by COVID. So, I don't, everyone's hurting everywhere. And I want to acknowledge that. And it's tough for everybody all around. But yeah, what's happening in the neighborhood, Tracy, it's about who's resourced to even follow the public health orders. So many of our families can't even follow the public health orders because they're not resourced to do it. They don't have the size of home to do that stuff. Our families don't have credit cards. They got to go out every day. They're on the buses every day, and then they get to the store and everything's sold out or there's lineups up, they don't, their home spaces. Like this is we're recording today and you're probably going to broadcast here. So look at us all. We're all very nice spaces here. My kids are not here today. But when we're doing our conference, when we're doing a Zoom there's 6 family members in the background, the dogs, and you can hear the kid, yanking at mom's leg. Like, it's not a nice, quiet Zoom meeting. Like, it's because people don't have the physical space to have a nice, quiet corner. So, and again, I love our patios and I love going out to restaurants and I want to support small businesses. But when I'm talking to my parents, that's not what their issues are. Their issues are their kids. They're really worried about their children. And I don't see any of that on the news ever. Like all I hear is like the restaurants are closing and the patios are closing. And I'm like, that is unfortunate, but is that the only issue out there? Like in our inner city, that is not what they're talking about, right? And so I don't really hear too much about kids. Like, where's the issue of kids? Like, I don't hear. And so again, I have 2 kids. They both go to 2 different schools and I have to just do hats off to schools because I think they're doing an amazing job with our kids in the education system with what's being handed out. And as and just as, even Mooney was having issues there with her computer, like our families don't have adequate screens. They don't have adequate Wi-Fi. They don't have enough screens, right? And kids having to have a quiet corner to do their homework in, like a lot of that just does not exist. And so I kind of point at, okay, how are we designing these solutions to the COVID problems? Like, are we involving our families in the design of those solutions? Because they would tell you all that. And then we would come up with different ways to solve for some of what they're saying. But I don't think lots of our families don't ever get asked. So I'll stop there, Tracy. But yeah, this is a great panel and everything that's been said so far is really resonating.
Well, no, and I mean, I want to, like, after everybody to join in because we need to help and solve problems like Diane's and solve, problems like Rana's so she's not feeling the way she does still at 43. Just, I just want to say that you look fabulous. No, I'm just kidding. So I want to move on, though, I want to welcome Sarah Osman. Sorry, Sarah, she joined us a little bit later. Sarah's co-founder of the Shameless Circle. So Sarah, I'd like you to speak on the racism card. Sorry, I'm using that word again, not card, but racism as an issue and how you've dealt with it, maybe through a lived experience or in your community.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been an interesting, eye-opening conversation. The panel is amazing to hear, and I would echo what everyone has said. In terms of racism and COVID, I think I'll echo what Rana said, what Dr. Mui said, that our community, especially coming from South Asian communities, we are not open to help. We do not want to talk about things, especially mental health issues. We are shamed and shunned for seeking help of any sort. And domestic violence is taking prevalence in COVID-19. We all know that. And I think when I see it as an opportunity during the pandemic, I think it's time for us to really normalize seeking help, especially in brown communities, that asking for mental health specifically is okay. So I think my take on this COVID-19 and the racism part is normalizing seeking help. I think we as a collective have to make a genuine effort as a society. I think we have to make a genuine effort in making it more normal for people to come out, for women to come out and seek help, because I think we've all heard that COVID-19 is the pandemic the shadow pandemic about women domestic violence, and then the pandemic of mental health issues coming out of the pandemic COVID-19. So I think for me is taking this opportunity and normalizing that seeking help as a society, as brown people, is okay.
No, well, thank you, Sarah. And I want to welcome to Amy Tung. Hi, Amy. How you doing? Do you want to chime in on this, Amy, too, as well? Peer support worker, too.
Very insightful conversation. My brain's going like very quickly right now. I have to agree with Sarah and in terms of like we just being more vocal, and then the education component, and also another thing within like the Chinese community would be the barriers. Like my parents, they're not fluent in English, right? They wouldn't know what therapy or how are they going to engage in a conversation with a therapist when they don't even understand all the terminology. They don't understand like the different organizations that are out there. So how are we reaching out to these communities, right? And my parents, and I can speak on like my parents and also other family members and our other friends and family, we hear about the mental health. It's very quiet because again, it's shameful. You have to keep everything within your household. You just don't talk about it. Even some of the times when I'm going through my stress and whatnot, the recommendation is just get it out of your head, right? And those are the tools and those are the things that they're aware of, but we don't really navigate like that anymore, right? And that's like developing your voice, like seeking for help. You shouldn't be ashamed for wanting to pick up the phone and, hey, like this is what's going on. Where do I get help, right? But the barrier is huge, because I've been actually doing a little bit of research on like the Chinese community in terms of like racism and mental health. And I'm also a peer support worker too. So I connect with individuals on a daily basis. And what's interesting is so far all my connections, none of them are Asian. Until like recently, I had one Japanese student, but no Asians. So that kind of like raised a little red flag. And I started to do research, and it was like the barriers. It was the generation, what our parents grew up with, and just the shame, the guilt feeling, and not wanting to talk about it, and also not knowing what they're feeling. They just think it's stress. Everything is just stress, regardless of what it is, stress. So, yeah.
Wow. So that's interesting results that you found. Gonna go to Melinda. Hi, Melinda Lee. Oh,
There
you
you
just
go.
have
Sorry,
to
took a second to unmute. Yeah, everything Amy just said is true. And I mean, I don't talk about it much. I have on the Hue crew for some reason. I don't know why you guys get this out of me, but I have been diagnosed with anxiety, and I've had to hide it for many, many years. And my parents are so supportive, so wonderful, but they didn't always understand, and they still don't completely understand. But there's that, it's not something to be shameful. And I think Susie will agree with me, we're both in communications, is we need to normalize it. We need to use our communication tools to normalize it, because you know, we're all going to go through some sort of mental health setback at one of life. And I see Robin's agreeing with me, so I like, and she can tell you as well. And I mean, in the interest of time, because I know we're running a little late, I just want to say it's what we can do too. You know, how we can, whether it's for the next generation. Tina and I are currently youth mentors, and we encourage our youth members in our community to be a little open. And you know, yes, school is stressful and bringing volunteerism and working and everything, and it's okay for them to show some, for the lack of a better word, weakness. But I'm really enjoying hearing everyone's thoughts, so I'm just gonna leave it at that and continue hearing other people's stories.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Melinda, for sharing, because that's all part of it, right? Is letting it go and communicating and have people listen to you. And it is okay. I'm going to go to Jessica. Hi, Jessica. Jessica's a peer support worker. So I guess your comments on, we've kind of slid it into COVID and, everything too, but, we will definitely talk about the whole mental health issue.
Yeah, so I guess one actual lived experience where I experienced racism. Well, when I'm not a peer support worker, I'm also a nursing student. So this happened probably in the first few years of me being in the program. So I was had my clinical rotation at a hospital, and my patient assignment for the next few weeks was some older gentleman. So I'm like, okay, like any other patient. But before I went to go see the patient, a lot of the regular healthcare staff were telling me, oh yeah, just ignore his rude comments. He's just like that. So I'm like, oh, okay. So then I went to, so I didn't really look too much into it until I actually was going to provide the care for him. So I'm like, yeah, they weren't kidding. So he was quite rude, demanding. And then when he started saying like racial slurs and asking me what country I was from, because us nurses all looked alike. So I was like, whoa, can't believe this guy just said that. But I just had to really like empathize. I'm like, hey, just trying to understand where he came from. He may grew up in a world where he didn't know like anything else but what he was taught. So I really had to look at that empathy there. So this was so I had to work with this patient for the next few weeks. So I'm like, hey, I can't go on like this for the next few weeks if I have to see him day in, day out. So I did talk to him, and I did explain that I'm like, yeah, I'm actually from this country, and I was born here. My parents immigrated here, and kind of just the education piece. And he was just like, oh, I didn't know that. So over time, eventually just that education and just teaching him about who I was and learning about him as well seemed to like break down that stigma that he already had about me, which I found it took some work, but eventually that's one, I guess, happy story that came out of it. And based on that experience, this past summer, I was able to be part of the Brandon University had a research study about, I think it was about racism being experienced in the healthcare system. So I did bring forward my experience and forward some recommendations on what maybe could work. So hopefully something comes of that research study. So it's not all bad. And yeah, I guess going back to what I guess Diane said about we have to embrace who we are. So on my other hat, as being a family peer support worker, this past summer as well, I was supporting a family member. She was of Filipino descent. I was supporting her while she was supporting a loved one going through their mental health struggles. So she did ask me, so are you Filipino? And I'm like, yeah. And then she was like, wow, that's just so nice knowing that you're not like hesitant in telling me that and sharing about your experiences with mental health. And that for me being able to share that with her, she was able to go, I talked to her later on, she was able to tell her family, like, yeah, there's like Filipinos who are open to talking about it, and it's okay to talk about our mental health and not just hiding behind closed doors. And it's real, and it's something that we should talk about. So oh, and before I go, my brother-in-law is watching us live, and he just wanted to say that Art Mickey, if you're still here, you're his childhood hero. So I just want to let that out.
Aw, that is awesome. That is so awesome. Oh my goodness. I'm going to go to Susie now. Susie.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
You just kind of want me to summarize my feelings on what we've experienced here today?
Yeah.
I was thinking about this Zoom tonight as I was, doing laundry or something earlier this weekend, and thinking about my mom and what we had sort of talked about in the last session where Nanette was there as well. And someone had posted on social media, there is a Filipino social media channel that has some like YouTube content on it. And it talked about some of the backhanded comments that are common in our community. So like if somebody sees you, hasn't seen you in a while, you know, your tita, your aunt, whatever, will tell you how fat you look. And that is supposed to be a compliment. And you as the younger person are supposed to respect them and not say anything about that, right? So that's the kind of culture that we are kind of brought up in. And I think there's a lot of that in Asian culture where older people get to say whatever they want to you, and you as the younger person just have to kind of put up with it, right? But the point of the content was that this is very damaging to young people and can be very traumatizing to, especially for people who did not grow up like that, like me, like half Filipino, half Asian people who are not used to that kind of passive aggressiveness from the other side of their family or anything like that. It can be very jarring. So the point of the content was to say, okay, we can stop this now. This generation does not have to put up with this. We can say, you know, that's not appropriate to say, or that hurts my feelings when you say that. All of these things about using our voice, right? Which is not something that we're taught in that culture. We're taught to be quiet when you're a child. You're supposed to be, you defer to the elders and all of that stuff, right? But the important part of that was there's a certain culture or a certain thinking in that culture where if you just ignore it, it goes away. Well, I think we realize in 2020 that just because you ignore something, it's not going to go anywhere. You actually have to take active steps to do something about it. So when people say, we need to get rid of racism, we need to examine our anti-Blackness and all, and everything else that comes along with that, I say, okay, so what are you doing? Because that requires action. That requires each of us to call out acts of racism or acts of discrimination when we witness it. And hearing, I believe Mr. Mickey tell his story about his friend who didn't want to tell the store manager about what had happened to him, that again goes back to when you are experiencing racism or experiencing someone being cruel to you because of your race or yelling at you across, a room, you in that moment, you inherently understand that the power structure is not in your favor. That is why you are not going to say, hey, you can't talk to me like that, because you are afraid that nobody else is going to come to your aid and say, yeah, you're right, you can't say that. That's the part that we need to work on. We cannot be bystanders anymore. We need to be actors. We need to take action. Bystanding has helped nobody. We need to step up and to actually vocalize our support for other people. And what that looks like for you might be different for other people. But until we realize that that power structure is not in our favor and that we need to flip that script permanently, nobody will ever feel safe reporting. And you can look at that from a sexual assault perspective as well. Any kind of perspective where the power structure is not in your favor. We need to flip that power structure. We need to take that power back and give it to those who are being abused and stop the abuse.
And that is why I asked Susie for her opinion. Oh, yeah. We'll all have suggestions on how we can start to actually walk together in that path. So I have like Robin and Charlotte left, our mental health advocates and experts. For the both of you, I'll go to maybe Charlotte and then, or no, maybe I'll go to Robin. And Charlotte, you can chime in, because I'm sure, Robin, you've sat here and you've heard everything. Have you now solved the problem for our Asian communities where we don't talk about mental health? What do we do?
Of course. I'm white and I know all the answers for every other community. You didn't realize that? I think like sitting here listening, and I'm sitting here, I do actually want to start off with an acknowledgement to the past, the present, and the emerging elders from every community that is here. And say that I loved what Diane said about the brave conversations. And I sit here and this is going to sound weird, so sorry, but I think talking about racism has become the sexy thing to talk about. Let's all talk about it, but let's do bugger all to change it. Like there's a bunch of people that are going after, as Susie said, right? There's people doing stuff, and then there's everyone else talking about it and being polite and going, well, we have to do something about it. And let's do another report that tells us what's happening, but we really like to put it on the shelf. Let's do another conversation, and we'll tokenistically hear what people have got to say. And I'm kind of comparatively looking at it in terms of the lived experience of people with mental health issues too. Everyone's talking about, let's get those people involved. Let's get these reports. Let's hear what they've got to say. But then the power structure goes, well, it doesn't quite fit. So we're going to do what we think is right, even though everyone else has said this doesn't work for our communities. And I think the piece about, and I think I spoke a couple of weeks ago on the Hue, you know, one of the groups that I worked with talked about people, and, you know, this is their experience, not mine, that when they were asking people to get involved in mental health services, people wouldn't because of the stigma and shame. But if they asked people to volunteer, that was seen as a great thing to do, and they could connect people a little differently. But I also want to say, why do we keep asking people to volunteer? Like, I know, like Amy and Jessica, like we just went through this whole recruitment process, and we were really clear about, we want to recruit people from groups who are going to use the service, not just the average person. And I don't know if I'm making sense. I feel really passionate and stupid because I'm white and having this conversation, but until we actually hear what the communities want and do it, whether it's in mental health or whether it's in response to COVID or whether it's education, until we actually do what people are asking for, like why we bother continuing to ask? Because people are going to get tired of talking about it and nothing changing. So I think in some of the stuff that we're trying to do now, we're saying this can't come from me. It's got to come from your community. And if you want it, how do I support you to have what you want? And so I think continuing to talk about it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to fall down on that mental health continuum. It's okay to have the brave conversations. I'm renowned for respectful challenges, and I think we have to keep respectfully challenging the status quo because it sucks. And until we actually have those brave conversations where there's differences, and how do we work through the differences so that we have things that work? Yeah, we're not going to go anywhere. So I don't know if I said anything useful. I'm going to shut up now.
Well, you always say great things, Robin. I'm just going to add something to it. I work in our business on the family side of mental health, and I am going to just praise Amy and Jessica and Sarah for being amazing mental health, not role models in their own communities, but also in Winnipeg. They're making a huge difference. And I know for Robin and I, if we could have a Sarah and an Amy and a Jessica in every community within our city, like somebody similar who's standing up and talking about mental health and how it's okay to start talk about it and how can we support you, I think our community would be that much stronger. And just, you know, like Amy said, having those open conversations as well, Jessica and Sarah, just say, you know, where people are listening and say, you actually can talk about it and not feel shame or blame, and you're saying absolutely, let's talk about it. And Diana, we would love to work with you. There's so many things you said tonight on the family side that just, makes me want to reach out to you and see what we can do to support the inner city community. Because those are some real concerns for families, and whatever we can do. Robin and I are here. Winnipeg is our community, and we want to do what we can in the mental health of it.
Oh, thanks so much, Charlotte. And just to reiterate what Charlotte said, Winnipeg is our community. And yes, we all look very different, as I can see all of your beautiful faces on the screen, but tonight was incredibly powerful and enlightening, I think. I would love to continue an open conversation. We have our mental health advocates here tonight. So, reach out into your communities, spread the word. I would love to hear more on how we can help. Having a platform like this, being able to express ourselves, this has been a dream for me. Diane, sorry, we're not having safe conversations, but in a safe place to have those tough conversations, I think is wonderful. And if we can reconnect and revitalize, I just wanted to throw a last question. I know it's late and everybody's ready to have their cocktail or go to bed. In light of, we're in a lockdown, by the time we get out of this, it's almost 2021. So the question is, are you looking forward to 2021? Or do you fear what it might hold? Tina, since I started with you first.
I was like, that is the hard question, which I have no answer, although it's listening to everyone. And, I think I had a different answer when you posted to us in an email about it, and I thought about an hour ago, and now I'm in a different place. And, I think I'm apprehensive, and I just, because I'm listening to everyone and I'm thinking about the Chinese community, and I'm thinking about all the work we're trying to do to shift programming and how we reach out to people. But, it's most clear to me that it's our senior population that we just can't reach in the same way. We run programs and it's the place that's meaningful. It's the fact that they can gather. And Melinda knows so much about this because she's been running this fantastic seniors computers programs. So it's not necessarily about, so she's helped them develop skills, perhaps not in anticipation of this moment, but it's about coming together in a place, and that's where they find the support. And no matter what we can come up with online as alternatives that can kind of sustain some of us and allow some of us to create new communities. Through Hue, I've been like, the connections I've been able to make with people has been fantastic, but that's not there for our seniors. They want to come to the place, they want to have personal interactions, and that's what sustains their mental health beyond their family kind of circles, that they can reach out to others. And so I think I'm really apprehensive because I think about those kinds of interpersonal connections are even, more important. And I know this is, of course, true when we look at any marginalized communities, but I think my concern is a cumulative effect and the slow startup, that it's, as everyone said, it's a disproportionate impact. And I fear that, the ease through which many of us can kind of move to different ways of interacting with people, continue to work in that framework, often makes us not see as clearly the work that needs to be done to create spaces and physical spaces for interaction, because that is going to be key to people's mental health, to their sense of community. And so I think I'm mostly apprehensive about when and how we get to start doing that again, because it's also I know by listening to everyone, it's what sustains us as well.
Oh, okay. Wanda?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Tina. Like at Aurora, we're what we call the relationship experts. And so all of our work is around relationships, how we connect with people. And this COVID really has with all of our groups has been really difficult, because all of our groups have in the past been face-to-face, and that's where they build the community and be able to, trust in others. Through Zoom, it does work, but then, a lot of times when, so I can't remember who Diane was talking about, families, large families that are, if you're on Zoom, you've got kids running in and out, dogs running in and out, and kids wanting, if it's a large family, they may only have one computer. and, you know, very interrupted internet service. So how do you support people when there's those limitations? But, you know, for now, this is all we have. They're grateful for having those connections. So it's just continuing to find a way to continue to build those relationships, maintain those relationships, and expanding the relationships outside of your own little bubble, right? So, you know, I'm really happy to see Diane there. I'd like to be able to reconnect with her and, you know, sort of continue the relationships with Clayton. I was at that session with the Japanese Cultural Association and had taken my son with me. And so it's having those intimate spaces where you can actually talk about those things and not fear anybody getting back at you, right? So, and it's as long as you have the openness to be able to understand the other side, and then you're just going to be able to continue to build those relationships. So, you know, hooray to this whole panel. You're an incredible group of people, and, you know, and it is about the relationships, it is about the connections, and it's about being open to hearing the hard stuff. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. Uzoma, 2021.
2021. I have to leave right after my comments, so I just want to say thank you again for creating the space. It's amazing to hear from everybody. 2020 was in a lot of ways a hot mess. It was a dumpster fire. It sucked. And, you know, I think everyone's doing their best to navigate all of that. But 2020 also shone a light on areas that needed to be seen. And we've seen so many people and communities rally and come together and push back and fight back and forge forward and say no more and we're done. And I think that those are invaluable moments and those are invaluable movements. And so I'm excited for 2021 because of the opportunities that I think are in front of us and the ways in which we're seeing people mobilize and come together and demand more and demand better and demand fairness. So that's what excites me. I love hearing from you folks and knowing the work that you're doing. And, you know, I want more and more people to not only have these conversations, but action, you know, action after they're done. And I think that's happening. And so that excites me. It motivates me. I'm excited to be a part of it. I want to support people who are doing that work. And so, you know, my job and in my role in my life is to let people know that I'm here for them and that I support them and I want to do that work alongside them. And I think that that's the energy I'm getting from people in this space. And that's the energy I want to put out there, because the more of us who are articulating that and committing to that, the more likely the changes we need to see happen will happen.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Uzoma, for joining us. And it won't be the last one. We'll have plenty more. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Dr. Mooney. What do you think 2021 is going to be like? Oh, you'll have to unmute yourself, Mooney. Oh, you're still muted.
Because I think my battery is also.
There you go. You're on now. Oh. Oh, you're still muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I think we have to be hopeful. That's what I tell all my patients. We are hopefully getting a vaccine soon by the end of the year. And once it's available and the appropriate people get the vaccine, just knowing that there are so many people working together on a number of vaccines, it gives us hope. As to the social, there's going to be a long-term sequelae, psychological sequelae.
Oh, and I believe we lost her. Her battery might have run out. Oh dear. Clayton, quickly, I'm going to go to you now with your words of wisdom. 2021, what's it hold? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay, there. I actually texted you back. I was hoping that by exactly June 21st, we'll get rid of Donald Trump, and then things will get back to normal. And I think when that happens, the universe will be in a better place for everybody. And I'm hoping that we start the kindness starts coming back to humanity. So that's my dream for 2021.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Mickey, Dr. Mickey Hart.
Yes, thank you. I guess one of the things that for our own community, we have a seniors group that meets regularly, and they have lunch and so on. And so for the past 6 months now, they haven't really been able to meet. And I know that that's really important, I think, for them to get together for their own mental health. Because many of them live in isolation, they're living alone, whatever. And this was their only opportunity to get out each week and have some Japanese food and so on. And that's been missing now and it likely will be for about a year. I hope in 2020 we get back to some normality in that sense. And hopefully with the vaccine, it's going to give us a lot more hope. So that's my wish.
Oh, and if
Thank
Sarah's
you.
still with us, Sarah, what are your hopes for 2021?
Tracy, I bought the 2021 calendar just this last weekend, so looks like I'm really hopeful. But yes, I'd concur what everyone said. We need to remain hopeful. 2020 has been, I don't know which word to use, but it's been an interesting year. But I think we all need to look at the opportunity it brings forward to us. I think we've all learned things about ourselves, our community, how we can better support each other, and get rid of things that were not serving us, our purposes, and start the new year fresh and knowing that there's a vaccine on the horizon and this pandemic would be behind us very soon. So hope is the word for 2021.
No, thank you, Sarah. Jessica.
Okay, yeah, 2020 was filled with a lot of struggles, and I don't know what else to say about it, but it also showed us how resilient many of us are. So I'm hoping from that in 2021 we can continue that resiliency and just be more positive in whatever it may be.
Yes, no doubt. And Melinda?
Hi, sorry, I was just trying to finish some work here for this panel tonight, but everyone just keep on being inspired by others and listening and learning, because I'm going to be honest, I learned a lot in 2020, and mostly it's by listening and trying to understand. And 2021 I think is time for action. I mean, now is time for action, but definitely when we have a little bit more freedom, we can definitely make those changes that we really need to do to change what's happening in our world systemically and focus on what we can do to make a real harmonious, place to live in, because I've had blinders on for years and years and years. I tell everyone that Canada's the best country, and it really is, but how, this is a world of equality and opportunity, but I'm learning so much more, and, and I never ever want to make light of any situation, because we all have our own experiences. And I would love to talk to you, everyone, again about this topic, because there's so much to learn, so much we can do. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so we've got that on our calendar to take action. I'm going to go to Rana.
Mute. I think the question is 2020. So I think we can, across the board, agree that it wasn't a good year. I think that a lot of bad things happened. A lot of light was kind of focused on things that perhaps were beneath the surface for a long time, and racism is one of those things. But to be completely honest, as hard as it's been, as deadly as it's been for a lot of people in terms of their emotional health and their kind of how they're feeling, and some families breaking up and relationships breaking up, like things have changed, people losing their businesses, people like whatever it is. But I think it's a great opportunity to kind of reconnect with who we actually are as human beings, and really reconnect to that spiritual part of you that doesn't actually require all those things, and maybe just learn to self-love a bit more and learn to have those really honest conversations with yourself, because now we're virtually focused and forced to be alone with ourselves. So maybe that's a really positive thing that came out of 2020 despite all of the bad. But 2021, I learned a lot this year. I lost a lot. I lost a lot of really important people in my life. But I definitely feel, and Melinda, you said it best, like I feel like I was floating around the world with these blinders on, assuming people were just great and life was just, rainbows and butterflies. But like, I think that things are really, it's time to kind of open our eyes to the realities of really what we're living in, and be active participants in life, in the world, in humanity, right? So for me, I hope when people leave here, they just kind of, or people watching, take some time, like know who you are, know where you came from, know your ancestors, know your history, figure out all of those things to make you a better human being. And that's my goal for 2021, continuing to self-learn and self-love and figure out who I am and what people who came before me would want to do. But I'm actually looking forward to 2021. I have no regrets for 2020 at all. I'm looking forward to a brighter year, but it may not be good, because I think Muni was trying to say this, and she kind of got cut off there, and I apologize if this wasn't what you were trying to say. But there's going to be a lot of after effects, right? And I think we had talked about teachers and different professionals and frontline workers, but there's going to be a lot of after effects of this past year on people. So just because the year is over doesn't mean how it's helped or damaged or whatever affected people is the word I'm looking for. That will go away just because the year changes. So I don't know. Be hopeful, be bright. That's all we can do.
Yeah, I seem to get cut off when I'm trying to talk about important things. So going back to that, yes, the long-term sequelae will last for years, especially the financial, the young people who don't have jobs, who some of them have gone back to live with their parents, but there are others that can't. And what happens to them, we see them as patients. And so it's very hard to listen to their stories because we feel helpless. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
No. Wow. So, Robin, 2021.
Well, 2021 is hopefully the year the Canadian government say, yes, you can be a permanent resident. So I'm like this. We'll see. We'll see. The application's going in now, so we're hopeful. 2021 is one of those interesting things for me. I'm pretty clear Australia said they probably won't open up the borders, which means I still can't get to go home. And given some significant things at home this year, that's been a little tough. But 2020 quietened my head for the first time ever. And I know a number of people with mental health issues whose heads went quiet because the world quietened down. And so I'm hopeful that even when things maybe open up slightly again, that we have a society that remembers the things that are important, and it isn't about the material things. And so I'm kind of hopeful that 2021 has people really ground in like the things that I see as important: community, like humanity, even trying to be kind to each other for no reason. I'm kind of hopeful that there might be a bigger wave of that, and we do start to address some of the things that have been in. I don't think it's about equality, it's about equity for me. I don't think stuff's ever going to be equal because we all start on different starting points. But if we can get some more equity between groups within the world, then I'm hopeful. Yeah.
Thank you. Charlotte.
Oh my goodness, these are hard to follow. 20, I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I'm always optimistic that 2021 is going to be a kinder, gentler to all of us. My hope is that the Canadian government lets Robin stay forever, because we are her 4th country she's lived in, and I'm hoping it's the last country she lives in, because she's a huge asset to our country. For her
the only one I've asked to live in besides the one I'm a citizen of. I love Winnipeg. Go figure, hey?
I'm hoping 2021 is the year of the family, and that we can finally reunite with our families and embrace them and celebrate that. You know, I know I'm looking at all of you, and I know so many of you haven't seen your families and physically. You've talked to them on Zoom, and that's been really hard. So that's my hope, is that we'll get that actual physical connection again, and our bonds will be even stronger from this experience in 2020.
Thanks, Charlotte. Diane.
Yeah, you know, when I look at the families that I see now, and I've worked with my whole professional career and have grown up around as well, there's so many of our families that are facing like the toughest challenges, and it's unjust that they have to meet those challenges, or that they have to go through those challenges. And so that really pisses me off, and it, you know, motivates and drives me. But our families do it, you know, with such grace and such humility, and they do it with such strength and resiliency. And so I have no choice but to follow suit, you know, like, and so they inspire me, they motivate me, you know, it's what, you know, why I'm so passionate. So that I want to double down, because, you know, I gotta also try as much as I can to make things better. So yeah, so I think I'm always optimistic, or always going, okay, we got to do better, right? I'm always reaching higher, and we got, you know, and just keep going. And so I give a lot of credit to my mom. You know, she's the original innovator. You know, I'm Anishinaabe, and my mom's original language, her first language is Anishinaabe. And she always would say, Baka, Baka, when I was growing up, right? Because we were dirt poor, we had nothing. And, you know, and so we lacked in a lot of sort of physical things, but, and she would say, Baka, and then she would come up with something, like she'd figure it out, right? And we just, oh, okay, she figured it out. So I feel entirely privileged to have been raised up that way. But, you know, the elders talk a lot about our greatest challenge is always our greatest teacher. So, you know, the toughest things you face, you're going to learn the most from, and you will get on the other side of it. And it is preparing you for the bigger challenge ahead of you, right? Like as you take on those challenges and get through those challenges, it builds you bigger and better to deal with bigger challenges. And so, you know, all the challenges that 2020 has thrown at us, or COVID has thrown at us, you know, it just helps us to tackle the next challenge. And then, you know, in terms of being a teacher, you know, who knew that we would be in a global pandemic? Who knew that we would be like not able to leave our house for a month, right? Who knew that there would be no restaurants to go to? Like all these things, if we had talked about this in 2019, we would have went, oh, never, impossible, right? And so in some ways, this COVID thing has taught us, like, you know, well, the impossible is actually possible. And I think we might have hit some climate change targets, you know, when we shut everything down, And like, who knew we could do that? So yeah, so there's a lot of teaching in those tough challenges. And so, yeah, I just have to look forward and have to figure out, yeah, what's coming next. And we got to get through that too.
Oh, well, thanks, Diane. And finally, Susie. Thoughts?
I'm always last. I'm going to try not to have a complex about that. So I had a long time I was actually dreading this question when I first saw your email. It's just like, oh gosh, I don't know if I have anything good to say about 2021, but I will say that there were a couple of answers that I would say echo my feelings on it now, which is hope and action. So hope is great. I think that hope can sustain us for a very long time. And we are not going through a struggle right now that nobody else has gone through before. Okay. So humanity has survived similar challenges and similar upheavals. Thank you to my husband there. Before we can get through this, and we will get through this together. Now, that being said, comes the action, right? So Uzoma and Rana have talked about this, in that we are on the cusp of making progress, but that craggly hand of racism, of patriarchy, of everything that's trying to hold back the human race is not going to go down without a fight. So it's upon all of us and everybody else out there who stands with us to take action and to fight that every chance that we get. We are seeing, what's happening in the States is not, I don't feel relaxed about the results yet, because I'm not going to be relaxed until January 20th, 2021. So my new year doesn't start till that date, because only then will I feel safe that there's been an actual transition. And we're already seeing rumblings of that not possibly happening. Okay. So if you read one book before the end of the year, I'm going to give you my book recommendation, which is The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker. It is an incredible book that changed my life. And it teaches the reader to really listen to that instinct and that intuition that tells you something's wrong. You might not see from an A to B perspective what's wrong, but your gut, your emotions are screaming at you that something is wrong. You need to change direction. You need to change your decision, whatever that might be. That book is a godsend, and I recommend it to everybody. You can read it twice. You can read it 3 times like I have, because I've read it 3 times over the last 20 years. And I think it's something that we all need to get in touch with, which is that when you are operating from an intrinsic place of you have power to make change, but you are not the focus of that. It's a selfless act, okay? The world needs more selfless acts. And if you can be part of a selfless act, that is what the world, the universe is calling for us to do right now, to be selfless and to put ourselves in the line of fire for other people who need us to stand with them, and to not just be allies, but I'm going to go back to my word, co-conspirator. We need people to stand up and to help us flip tables. So for 2021, may we all find a table to flip.
See, but Susie, that's why I have you go last. There is method to my madness. Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, all of you, yes, it's going to be a very interesting new year, but I love that. Let's find a table to turn. And I think with all of these people that we have had on the panel tonight, amazing. Thank you so, so much, each and every one of you. It's been an amazing conversation. I have learned so much. And I think that if you're willing, we'll continue to have these different conversations about different things, because really, if we can connect other people and really support each other, that was the whole thing at the beginning of the show, saying we just need to support each other and help each other. So stay safe, stay healthy. Welcome you to our first show of Hue at Home. Hopefully there'll be many more to come. Obviously, safe distance in this virtual world, but eventually I might have you on my set live in person. So that is my hope. That's what I'm working for. Yes, and you, Robin, doing your own mental fit video here.
Sorry? Oh, yes. Fit and fun for mental health. 4 o'clock every day, guys. Come and play.
Oh, there you go. So yes, thank you so much. And like I said, stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye. Good night.